Faith communities provide critical context for people to come together to worship, to find meaning and purpose in life, and to provide each other with social, emotional, and spiritual support. Faith communities can be a rich source of care and support for those who are suffering, those who may feel alienated, or those who are seeking to find a place to belong. In this 4-part video series, we explore this potential within faith communities by devoting attention to 2 groups of persons: individuals with mental health challenges in general, and military veterans in particular. 3 points need emphasis up front. First, most veterans do not have diagnosable mental health problems. Second, most persons with mental health problems are not veterans. And third, we all experience variations of psychological and emotional suffering. By focusing on the intersection of veterans' issues and mental health problems, and exploring the stories of a number of veterans who have gone through mental health challenges, we hope to encourage faith communities to consider 2 things. First, how they care for persons with mental health problems, regardless of if they are veterans. And second, how they care for veterans specifically, regardless of whether they have mental health problems.
Hello, I'm Father Bill Cantrell. You're going to hear from a number of different presenters throughout this video series. They represent diverse religious traditions. We encourage you to explore within the richness and depth of your own faith tradition how your community might provide a welcoming spiritual home for those with mental health problems. You will also hear about some of the distinct considerations that will be helpful to have in mind when reaching out to veterans, service members, and their families. Their perspectives reflect the real experience and challenges they have had in trying to integrate in faith communities. Thank you for taking the time to explore these topics which affect all of us, and which we hope will contribute to a better understanding and appreciation of those with mental health problems.
The congregation needs to be encouraged by the leadership and instructed by the Scriptures to recognize that everybody has spiritual gifts, and that the church is diminished by the refusal of the people to exercise those gifts that have been given to them, and not to be used just for themselves, but for the sake of those around them. The mature Christian community is going to be the place where those gifts come together, orchestrated by wise leadership under the leadership of the Holy Spirit, to provide not just 1 or 2 experts in the field, but a congregation of people who, exercising their gifts in humility, ask, how can we serve the person who has come to us in need?
The believers are like one body. If one part suffers, the entire body suffers, right? And so really reframing that understanding of that suffering in that this is an opportunity for other believers to come together and support this person. One phone call can make all the difference in the world. And that's the power of the faith communities. And we all have that power to check in with each other, especially those that we think may need more help at that moment. It's vital that we create situations and places and communities where it almost becomes a standard operating procedure. That if somebody is suffering, we're going to go help. If we lose a loved one, we're going to go bring food to their homes. That was a prophetic practice in Islam, that when somebody loses a loved one, you bring food to their home. You try to alleviate their burden as much as you can and be a presence for them.
It's so important to speak about the role of laity, especially from a Jewish perspective. And the truth of the matter is a community is not called a community unless it has these committees, these groups that specialize in reaching out. And these committees have it as their job to visit people who are ill and to bring lasagna and do whatever is necessary to help them. In my synagogue, it's called a mensch squad. Mensch means a kind of it means a man, but it means a being a decent person. So the mensch squad, so they'll send out to the 35 people on the mensch squad a note that so-and-so needs their dog walked, or so-and-so needs their car fixed, or whatever, and then somebody responds. And now there are even some synagogues that have mental health liaison committees, which means mental health professionals, many retired, within the community who you can go to speak to get a referral.
In the Christian tradition, we speak of the spiritual gifts of the Holy Spirit, a variety of gifts that come from the same source. So how in your faith community might you assess the gifts you have received and begin to visualize how they give shape to this goal of a welcoming spiritual home where those struggling with mental health issues can safely belong? Finding a place to belong can be a challenge for many of us, perhaps particularly so for veterans following deployment or transitioning after military service. At present, less than 1% of our country's population enter military service. Some of them have experienced physical and/or mental injuries. Some may have had mental health problems prior to military service and now revisit them as they return to civilian life. All veterans have lived in some form of transition and often are seeking a place to call home, where they can be grounded and fully reintegrate in their community and in their faith. This is why we have included veterans, service members, and their families for consideration in the following presentations. Michael Yandel is an Iraq veteran, a Divinity School graduate, and current PhD student. He will speak to us about his faith, his service, and his struggle to reintegrate into a faith community when he returned home after his combat tour in Iraq.
There was really no reintegration process for me or the other, at least young single soldiers in my unit when we redeployed from Iraq in 2004. It was hard. We felt, at least I felt, and I think it's accurate to say my peers felt this way. We were very, very isolated. As far as the faith community goes, they're caring people, and they knew that something had changed with me, I think. Most of them lived in the suburbs of Pine Bluff, and they had kids, or they were retired, and they were dealing with the issues that raised for them. Their community wasn't shaped in such a way as to handle any issue I was presenting. What I can say is there was at that time, there was a lot of celebration, not necessarily of the war, but of the military. For me, this was kind of a wall that shut off any sort of real dialogue about what actually happened in war, because there's really one story going on, and I felt that story constricting my ability to tell my own story. It cut off my ability to be a soldier in the way that I actually was one, with reservations, with second thoughts, with regret alongside pride.
Veterans I've worked with most frequently, it's people who were formed in Christian communities, went to war and saw war, and they come back as deeply spiritual seekers in some ways. And I've learned from veterans that to get away from broad theoretical thinking about war and peace, and more toward the specific kind of context in which war is experienced and in which military service happens. Some have had bad experiences where people have asked them things about the military service, including what it was like to kill other people, or what it was like to be at war that clearly showed that somebody didn't really appreciate the context in which they'd served. And so when people speak about war in ways that are kind of theoretical and general and make assumptions and don't actually show any awareness or knowledge of the actual context of recent American wars, that's typically going to be off-putting for a lot of veterans, and that can happen sometimes in faith communities. In the same way, when people make assumptions about what veteran experience must be like based on sort of general assumptions about the military, that can be off-putting as well. And I think when people insist on hero language, that can be off-putting as well, because that's too simple. You know, even when well-intentioned, it's too simple.
If we have a family who comes to the church and say, our house burned down last night, we've lost everything, I think the faith community does very well to come alongside that family and love on that family and encourage that family and provide for that family. I think when they announce that they have loved ones who have died, we are very effective in coming alongside and hugging and being compassionate. Where that becomes ineffective is when perhaps that same example we say after a certain amount of time, you should be finished with your grieving. An alternative approach might be to recognize that there are some things that people are going to have to deal with on this side of the journey. I equate it to Paul's thorn in the flesh. He can pray all the day long for it to be removed, but God's response is sufficient, is my grace. I think that the faith community, if we position ourselves to be the conduits of that grace and just to say, this is here. We can't pray it away. We're not going to spiritualize it away. We're not going to ignore it, but we're going to say the thorn is here. But we are going to be conduits of God's grace. Also, when we're dealing with those mental disorders that might have a biological origin, when we, as a faith community, put a burden upon an individual to have them to, in essence, choose between if this is a spiritual matter versus one that's truly biological in origin, we miss the opportunity to say, regardless as to the nature of this, you are hurting, you are struggling, and we are going to come alongside you where you are and support you through this process.
We have heard briefly about some of the temptations to spiritualize issues that may have some spiritually related connections, but are perhaps more centered in the domains of medical or mental health. We also heard a little about how faith communities are often well-equipped and do a very good job of coming to the aid of those who are dealing with loss and medical illness, but also how it is often less obvious and more difficult to provide the same kind of support to those suffering from mental illness. Now let's take a moment to meet Matt and CALLIE BARR. Matt is also an Iraq veteran and one who has experienced a kind of loss that is unique to combat. He and CALLIE have worked together as Matt continues to reintegrate his life and faith after returning from combat.
So my family wasn't really religious, and I come from a broken home, so there wasn't really influence of God in my life, I would say. Up until I was in high school, and 9/11 happened, and I wanted to join the Marines, and I wanted to go to war. So I felt this great passion, but for that, and I also felt the need to find God. I guess I was just preparing myself to die. So, like joining the Marines, I know they're the first to fight. Our town is the Catholic church. There is the biggest church. Most people go there. So I went there and I got baptized there my junior year, all on my own. And I was so devout in it that they wanted me to actually start seminary school and become a preacher. And I was like, well, I'm going to war, so I want to go to war.
So I grew up very conservative religion. You weren't really encouraged to participate with people outside of the church. So he was Catholic, and that was as we started to know each other and like each other, it was like a big deal because we were not Catholic. So we had a lot of initial discussions about that. And so Matt actually, he told me he was joining the Marine Corps. And
I didn't know what that was.
I thought that they were like glorified Boy Scouts. I really had no idea.
It was like the Peace Corps.
Yeah. So he went to boot camp, and he came back, and So he said, I want us to be together, like forever. How do we do this? And so I said, well, you can't be Catholic, and you got to go to church with me. And so he said, okay, that he was going to come to church with me, that would be all right. So Matt came back from his first deployment, and we got married like within 2 weeks. There were a lot of reservations obviously with my church group about me marrying Matt, and he had gone to war, and anybody from our church who would have joined the military would have been a conscientious objector. That was expected. So there was already some friction there.
I tried to become part of her faith. I really tried to integrate myself, but I always felt like an outcast because I was a warrior. I did go to war. I did kill people. I did, I had a lot of brothers that were lost. So, I never felt a part of them because of that. What they preached was not, every time I felt like I was in church, I felt like I was going to light on fire and burst in flames because, what they're preaching is, all the sins that I committed.
And I think we can, bring that back to faith again, because I was such a conservative religion that I found a lot of strength and encouragement through faith and through the church I went to. But increasingly also, I think we just started to lean more on each other because my faith community was not supportive in the way that we needed. We're being preached against, oh, you can't go do this, or drinking's so bad, or, the list of sins, right? But what I know, these guys are good guys, right? They would do the greatest act of love and kindness and lay down their life for you. But because they're at the bar, you're going to write them off. And so there was a disconnect there. And eventually I leave the church and was, in essence, excommunicated, I guess is the best way to say that.
Yeah.
And so it took us several years to find a safe place, a place to go. I think to its detriment, a lot of times when we think about church, to my mind, often it's, and partly this is also because of how I was raised, but there's judgment. So that's not a safe place. And so it's creating an atmosphere where there isn't judgment and where you can come as you are. Safe places for stories are non-judgmental places.
The most helpful kinds of faith communities with respect to mental illness are those where people know how to be human with each other, who know how to communicate well, who know how to support each other, who know how not to abuse and shame each other, but who know how to address concerns and difficulties in constructive ways. That's going to be the kind of community that can be healing for anyone, for all of us, whether we have mental health issues or not. The theologian with whom I work the most is a medieval Christian theologian named St. Thomas Aquinas, who wrote that charity, the theological virtue of love, is God's love given to us as a gift by which we love ourselves and others and God. And so we're bound to each other in this way.
So many of my friends are struggling, and I just think, if they had someone to lean on or to bring them in, I would say, to the fold, or just make them feel a part of something again, part of a community. They need a pastor to actually go to them or to come to them and be like, hey, I'm here for you. What do you need? Like, just please tell me. And I think one big note to something to note, with the military and with the chaplains and the services on base, they come and go. The chaplains come and go. Like in the last year, 2 years, we've had 5 different chaplains. So where communities can be really effective is they're there. They're going to be constantly there, so they can make a greater impact, I think, even than a chaplain per se on an installation.
By no means do we seek to exhaustively cover all the important topics relating to veterans or mental health. Further, we recognize that different faith traditions appropriately will approach these issues in different ways. As you consider how your community approaches some of the topics raised in this video, we encourage you to ask yourself, do people feel like they can openly and honestly share their stories in our community? What facilitates this happening? What prevents it from happening? Secondly, ask yourself, how does our community balance aspirations for hope and healing alongside the persistence of suffering in the world and the attempt to abide with those who suffer? Are there times of erring on one side or the other? And finally, ask yourself, what are our strengths and weaknesses in providing a place for veterans in our community? As well as, what are our strengths and weaknesses in providing a place for those with mental health struggles in our community? These are not easy questions to answer, but they are important questions.